I'm Megan. I'm 32 years old, and for the last decade, I've built a life defined by order, professional success, and the kind of quiet that only comes when you've finally escaped a house full of chaos. I live in a beautiful condo, a place I bought with every single cent I saved while my peers were out partying, and my sister Madison was finding herself on my father's dime. You see, in my family, roles weren't just assigned. They were etched in stone. Madison was the golden child, the one whose every whim was treated like a royal decree. My father, Frank, was her adoring audience, a man who meticulously balanced ledgers as an accountant, but was completely blind to the emotional bankruptcy in his own home. And then there was me. I wasn't the favorite. I was the support beam, the invisible part of the house that no one notices until it fails to hold everything else up. I've spent 30 years being the reliable one, the one who didn't need help, the one who worked 2 jobs in college while Madison had her tuition and her spiritual retreats paid for without a single question. My parents called it building character for me, while for her, it was investing in her potential. It was a double standard that I swallowed for years, hoping that if I was successful enough or helpful enough, they would finally see me as more than just a backup plan. But this story isn't about my past. It's about the moment I realized that being a support beam is a choice, and I decided to stop holding up a roof that was only meant to shelter people who didn't respect me. It all came to a head last Sunday. The air in my parents' house was thick with the smell of pot roast and roasted potatoes, a scent that used to mean comfort, but now just felt like the preamble to a negotiation I was destined to lose. I walked in, placing a nice bottle of wine on the counter, trying to ignore the knot of resentment tightening in my stomach. My mother was fussing over Madison, who was sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through her phone with that lazy, entitled grin she wears when she knows she's about to get exactly what she wants. Before we dive into the betrayal that changed everything, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's truly amazing to see how far these stories of justice can travel. The dinner started like any other. Frank sat at the head of the table like a king in a kingdom where his daughter was the crown princess. They spent 20 minutes talking about Madison's big move to college and her latest vision for her future, which apparently involved a lot of expensive equipment and zero personal responsibility. I nodded. I offered the lukewarm encouragement I was trained to give. I played my part. Then, my mother placed her napkin on her lap and gave me a smile that made my blood run cold. It was the smile of someone offering you a gift that's actually a trap. Well, with Madison leaving for school next week, we've come up with the most sensible plan to help her get settled, she announced. Frank didn't even look up from his plate. He just kept cutting his meat, avoiding my eyes. "It's settled, Megan," he said, his voice full of that unearned authority. "Your sister is taking your new car to college. It's a reliable vehicle and you work from home anyway. You don't need it like she does." The air left my lungs. My new car. The one I had traded my old life for. I stared at their expectant faces, and in that moment, I realized they weren't asking. They were informing me of a hostile takeover of my property. But they forgot one thing. A support beam can hold a house up, but it can also let it fall. And as I sat there, I realized I had already made a move they never saw coming. Wait until they find out that the keys they're so eager to grab don't belong to me anymore. To understand why I did what I did, you have to understand the blueprints of my childhood. In the house I grew up in, the air was thick with a double standard that everyone acknowledged, but no one dared to name. My sister, Madison, was the golden child, the crown princess, whose every dream was treated as a vital family investment. I, on the other hand, was the support beam, the quiet, structural element expected to hold everything up, without ever needing a drop of maintenance myself. The disparity started early. When I turned 18, my gift was a bus schedule, and a stern lecture from Frank about the importance of saving for a reliable used vehicle. He told me that struggle builds character, and that earning my way would make me appreciate things more. Meanwhile, for Madison's 18th birthday, Frank handed her the keys to a brand new sedan, telling her she needed a safe, stylish way to find herself on a cross-country road trip. My character was built on the city bus. Her potential was nurtured in a car with a leather interior and a $0 price tag. This pattern followed us into university. While Madison's tuition for a fine arts degree was paid for without a second thought, I was expected to cover half of my own costs for a degree in statistics. I spent my college years working 2 part-time jobs and scouring the internet for every obscure scholarship I could find, all while Madison spent her weekends at music festivals. My parents called this responsibility. I called it what it was, a family betrayal of my efforts. The unspoken rule was that my stability was an expectation, but Madison's whims were a priority. When I graduated with honors, the reaction was a lukewarm, "That's nice, dear." But when Madison designed a single poster for a local bake sale, you would have thought she'd won a Pulitzer Prize based on the way my mother, Margaret, gushed over it. My achievements were milestones of silent labor. Hers were firework displays of unearned praise. By the time I was 28, I had saved enough to buy my own condo. It was a modest, beautiful sanctuary, born from years of saying no to vacations and yes to overtime. I was immensely proud of it. It was the one place on earth where I wasn't a backup plan, but the architect of my own peace. But to my family, my house wasn't a personal achievement. It was a convenient asset to be exploited. "Oh, Megan's place is so close to the city," my mom would say, before dropping off boxes of Madison's failed hobbies to be stored in my spare room. My office became a graveyard for Madison's transient ambitions. An easel spattered with dried paint, a set of DJ turntables, a yoga mat she used once. My role was to be accommodating, to smile, and make space for her chaos. If I ever pushed back, Frank would sigh and tell me I was being difficult or ungrateful. "It's what family does, Megan," he'd say, using the word family as a weapon to guilt me into compliance. The latest incident, however, was the final brick in the wall. 6 months ago, Madison accidentally totaled her gifted car while distracted by her phone. Instead of facing consequences, she was allowed to use my vehicle for 3 weeks while I navigated inconvenient bus routes to get to my client meetings. My mother told me my time was disposable since I worked from home, while Madison needed to get to her networking events. When I finally got my car back, the tank was bone dry, the interior smelled like stale fast food, and there was a fresh dent on the passenger side that no one bothered to apologize for. This cycle of family karma was exhausting. I realized that as long as I owned anything they valued, it would never truly be mine. They saw my hard-earned life as a safety net for Madison's irresponsibility. That's why, when I finally received a massive promotion last month, I decided to reward myself with the one thing I'd always wanted, a high-end luxury SUV. I didn't tell them. I didn't want their lukewarm congratulations, or their inevitable questions about why I needed something so nice. I thought the car would be my trophy, my private victory. I didn't realize it would become the ultimate target of their entitlement. As I parked it in their driveway for that Sunday dinner, I saw Frank and Madison standing by the window, their eyes locked on the sleek metallic finish. I saw the look of greed on my sister's face, but I had no idea that my father had already promised her my keys before I even sat down for the pot roast. As I stepped through the front door, leaving my sleek, metallic charcoal SUV gleaming in the driveway, the atmosphere inside changed instantly. Usually my arrival was a non-event, a quiet "Hello, Megan," followed by 20 minutes of Margaret fussing over whatever Madison had done that week. But today, the silence was different. It was heavy with calculation. "That's quite the machine out there, Megan," Frank said, his voice carrying a strange, forced lightness as he looked up from his newspaper. He didn't say he was proud of me. He didn't ask how many late nights at the firm it took to earn that promotion. To him, the car wasn't a symbol of my hard work. It was a new line item in a family ledger he intended to balance in Madison's favor. Madison was sitting at the kitchen island, swinging her legs and sipping an expensive iced coffee, likely bought with the emergency money Frank had given her just that morning. "It's so pretty, Megan," she chirped, though her eyes were cold, scanning the vehicle through the window like a predator sizing up its next meal. "It looks so safe, so much better than that old sedan I had, before the accident." I felt that familiar knot of family betrayal tightening in my chest. They were already setting the stage. They were framing my success as a remedy for her failure. I spent years driving a beat-up compact while saving every penny, but Madison expected to leapfrog straight into a $50,000 luxury vehicle because she simply needed it. My mother, Margaret, came over and squeezed my arm, but her eyes never left the driveway. "It's a lot of car for one person who stays at home all day, don't you think, dear?" "I earned it, Mom," I said, my voice steady but firm. "It's my reward for the senior analyst position. It's not just a car. It's proof that I don't have to rely on anyone else." Frank gave a sharp, dry laugh. "Independence is great, Megan, but family is about shared resources. We've always taught you that." "No, Frank. You taught me that my resources were for the family, while your resources were for Madison." I realized then that my $50K achievement wasn't a trophy to them. It was a solution to the Madison problem. She was heading to a prestigious college 5 hours away, and the idea of her taking the bus or driving a cheap clunker was offensive to their ego. They wanted the prestige of the car without the sacrifice of the payments. As we moved toward the dining table, Madison whispered to Frank, loud enough for me to hear, "It would fit all my dorm gear perfectly, wouldn't it, Dad?" Frank just patted her hand and whispered back, "Don't worry, honey. We've got it handled." The meal hadn't even started, and I already felt like a stranger in my own skin. I looked at the pot roast, the same meal we'd had 1,000 times, and realized this was the last time I would allow myself to be the support beam for their entitlement. I knew a storm was coming, but I also knew I had a secret that would act as my lightning rod. I wasn't just going to say no this time. I was going to ensure that no was the only answer they could ever receive. I let them talk. I let them dream. I even let Madison brag about the road trips she was planning for her first semester, all while I felt the cold, hard weight of a different set of documents in my purse. The dining room was set with the good china, a detail I usually found charming, but today felt like the ceremonial dressing of a crime scene. The aroma of the pot roast was suffocating. I sat there, picking at a potato, watching the way my mother, Margaret, fussed over Madison's plate. She gave her the best cuts of meat, the extra gravy, the undivided attention. It was a play I'd seen 1,000 times, but the ending was about to change. The conversation started with the usual fluff: the weather, a neighbor's new dog, Frank's latest golf score. It was a carefully constructed illusion of normalcy, the calm before the storm. I should have seen the signals. The way my mother was overly cheerful. The way Frank kept his eyes fixed on his plate, meticulously cutting his beef with the precision of a man who had already decided how to divide an estate. This was a family betrayal in the making, and I was the only one who hadn't seen the evidence. Margaret finally set her fork down and clasped her hands together, a beaming smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, Megan, with Madison leaving for her freshman year next week, we've been talking. We've come up with the absolute perfect solution to make sure she's safe and successful." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "What plan is that, Mom?" "Well," she chirped, as if she were announcing a surprise party, "since you work from home and rarely leave your condo anyway, it's all sorted. Madison is taking your new SUV to college. It's perfect. It has all the latest safety features, plenty of room for her gear, and you won't have to worry about the payment since Frank and I will cover the insurance." The air left my lungs. I stared at her, then at Frank, who was chewing slowly, still refusing to meet my gaze. I looked at Madison. She was leaning back in her chair, a smug, expectant smirk on her face. She genuinely believed this was her due. They all did. They hadn't asked if I would be willing to give up my hard-earned reward. They had simply decided that I would. My home sanctuary was already being invaded by their demands, and now they were requisitioning my very means of independence. You're joking, right? I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. Margaret's smile faltered, replaced by a look of sharp annoyance. Don't be dramatic, Megan. It's the logical solution. Why should we spend $20,000 on a used car for Madison when you have a perfectly good brand new vehicle sitting in the driveway that you barely use? You sit in that office of yours all day. You don't need a luxury SUV to walk 10 feet to your kitchen. I paid for that car with my own sweat, Mom, I said, my voice growing stronger, fueled by a rising tide of rage. I worked 80-hour weeks for that promotion. That car is mine. It's not a family asset. Frank finally looked up, his voice dropping into that accountant tone he used when he wanted to end a discussion. Megan, be reasonable. Your sister is going 5 hours away. She needs reliability. You are a senior analyst. You're smart enough to see the math here. We are a family. We help each other. It's your turn to step up and support Madison's future. My turn? I wanted to scream. When was it not my turn? I was the one who paid for her rent when she got evicted. I was the one who let her ruin my old car. I was the support beam they constantly leaned on until I cracked. And now they wanted to tear the beam out entirely to build a pedestal for Madison. Madison chimed in, her voice dripping with that faux sweetness she used to manipulate Frank. Come on, Megs. Don't be so selfish. It's just for the first few semesters. Think of it as a loan. Besides, it'll look so much better on campus than some beat-up clunker. The audacity was breathtaking. They had spent 29 years cultivating this entitled man-child of a sister, and now that her needs were an inconvenience to their peaceful retirement fund, they were outsourcing the problem to me. They mistake my years of quiet compliance for permission. They thought because I'd always stayed silent, I would stay silent now. But as I looked at their expectant, greedy faces, a cold, hard resolve settled over me. This was the birth of their family karma. They had drawn up the blueprints for my life without ever consulting the person living it. So, I decided right then and there to draw some new ones of my own. I see, I said, leaning back and picking up my wine glass with a steady hand. So the decision is made? It's the only thing that makes sense, dear, Margaret said, her smile returning, thinking she'd won. I took a slow sip of my wine, looking Madison right in the eye, knowing that in less than 48 hours, her perfect plan was going to go up in smoke. I didn't leave that dinner with a scream or a dramatic exit. I left with a quiet, polite nod that they completely mistook for a white flag. As I drove my luxury SUV home that night, the interior felt like a gilded cage. I looked at the dashboard, the premium leather, and the steering wheel I'd worked so hard to touch, and I realized that to Frank and Madison, this wasn't my car. It was just an asset they hadn't liquidated yet. The rage I felt wasn't hot. It was a cold, clean energy, like a solved equation. Monday morning, I didn't sit down at my desk to look at spreadsheets. Instead, I drove straight back to the dealership where I'd bought my trophy only a month prior. I needed to see Thomas. Thomas was a seasoned professional, a man who understood that sometimes a car isn't just about transportation. It's about a lifestyle change. When he saw me pull into the lot, his face lit up with a confused smile. "Megan, back so soon?" he asked, walking out to meet me. "Is there something wrong with the SUV? A technical glitch?" "No glitch, Thomas," I said, my voice steady. "But I've realized I made a mistake. I bought a target, and what I actually need is a fortress." I sat in his glass-walled office, the sun reflecting off the rows of shiny vehicles outside, and I explained the situation. Not the emotional drama, but the data. I told him I wanted to trade in the luxury SUV for something modest, reliable, and entirely unassuming. I wanted a car that screamed sensible and used, and I wanted the difference in value returned to me in a check that I could tuck away into a high-yield savings account where no one could find it. Thomas looked at me for a long moment, his professional mask slipping just enough to show a hint of sympathy. He'd seen a lot of people buy cars to impress their families, but he'd never seen someone sell one to escape them. "You're sure about this, Megan? You'll take a bit of a hit on the depreciation." "I'm a data analyst, Thomas," I replied. "I've already run the numbers. The hit I'll take on the trade-in is nothing compared to the tax my family plans to levy on my life. I'm not just trading a car. I'm buying my freedom." As he pulled the paperwork together, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I was no longer the reliable, accommodating Megan who acted as the family's support beam. I was becoming the architect of my own future. Every time I signed a document, I felt a chain breaking. I was signing away the role of the scapegoat. I was signing away the expectation that my success existed only to cushion Madison's failures. While Thomas worked on the final valuation, my phone buzzed in my purse. It was a text from Madison. "Hey, Dad said I can pick up the car on Friday. I'm thinking of getting those cute fuzzy seat covers. Don't worry, I'll pay for those myself. LOL." The sheer, unadulterated entitlement made me want to laugh. She was already decorating my property in her head, oblivious to the fact that the property was currently being dismantled. I didn't reply. I just watched as Thomas printed out the final trade-in agreement. My SUV, the $50,000 problem, was gone. In its place was a reliable silver hatchback and a check that represented my safety net. I walked out of that dealership and got into the new used car. The silence inside was beautiful. It was the sound of a plan coming together. I drove home, parked the silver hatchback in my garage, and closed the door. My family thought they had successfully requisitioned my life, but they had no idea that I had already moved the goalposts. The ambush was set for next Sunday, and for once, I wasn't the one walking into a trap. The week leading up to the Friday pickup was a masterclass in psychological warfare. My family interpreted my silence as surrender. They thought I was mourning the loss of my car, sitting in my condo, and sulking like a child who'd had a toy taken away. In reality, I was celebrating my rebirth. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from the Maddie's Road Trip group chat, a chat my sister had the audacity to create and add me to, I felt a surge of cold, clean energy. Madison was already colonizing my property before she'd even touched the steering wheel. Her messages were a relentless barrage of entitlement. "Hey Megs, does the SUV have a good GPS, or should I buy a mount for my phone?" Or, "Dad says I should take your spare key now so I don't lose it on moving day. Can I swing by?" She wasn't just taking a car. She was trying to take the lead in a life I had built from scratch. She viewed my hard work as a communal resource, a fruit tree she could shake whenever she felt a little hungry. Then came Frank. He called me on Wednesday afternoon, his voice carrying that heavy, authoritative tone he used when he was about to issue a royal decree. "Megan," he started, skipping the pleasantries, "I'm coming over Friday at 4 p.m. with Madison. Make sure the car is washed and the tank is full. We want her to have a fresh start for the drive to campus." He spoke as if he were giving orders to a junior clerk at his accounting firm. There was no "thank you," no "is this okay?" and certainly no "I appreciate you doing this for your sister." To Frank, my compliance was a debt I owed for the character he claimed to have built in me by making my life harder than Madison's. He had mistaken my years of quiet patience for permission to treat me like a subsidiary of the family corporation. "I'll be here, Frank," I said, my voice as flat and unreadable as a blank spreadsheet. "Good. Don't make this difficult, Megan. It's for the best. You'll see." Friday at 4 p.m. arrived. I sat in my living room, the blinds drawn, watching through the slats as Frank's sedan pulled into my driveway. Madison hopped out of the passenger seat, practically vibrating with excitement. She was carrying a box of cute accessories, a fuzzy steering wheel cover and a set of air fresheners. They walked up to my front door and rang the bell, then rang it again when I didn't answer immediately. When I finally opened the door, Frank didn't even look at me. He looked past me, his eyes searching the empty driveway behind his own car. "Where is it, Megan? Where's the SUV? Did you park it in the garage?" "No, Frank," I said, leaning against the door frame with a calmness that seemed to irritate him instantly. "The SUV isn't in the garage." Madison's face fell. her smug smile replaced by a look of sharp suspicion. What do you mean? You didn't hide it, did you? Dad, she's being difficult again. Megan, enough games, Frank snapped, his face beginning to flush a blotchy red. We have a schedule to keep. Where is your sister's car? I looked him straight in the eye, savoring the moment. It's not her car, Frank. And it's not my car anymore either. If you want to find that SUV, you'll have to go talk to Thomas at the dealership. The look of pure, unadulterated confusion on their faces was worth every cent of the trade-in loss. But the explosion was only just beginning. Frank stood on my porch, his face transitioning from a dull confusion to a shade of red I'd only seen when he was dealing with a particularly difficult tax audit. Madison was behind him, clutching her box of cute car accessories like a shield, her eyes darting between me and the empty space where my $50,000 SUV used to sit. The air between us was electric, charged with the kind of tension that happens just before a structure finally gives way. What do you mean, Thomas? Frank's voice was low, vibrating with a dangerous edge. I didn't come here for a scavenger hunt, Megan. I came for the keys to your sister's transportation. It was never her transportation, Frank, I said, my voice as calm and calculated as a spreadsheet. It was my property, and as of 48 hours ago, that property has a new owner. I realized that a luxury vehicle was just a target for entitled demands, so I traded it in for a silver hatchback and a very large check that is currently sitting in a bank account you will never touch. Madison let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. She dropped her box, and a fuzzy steering wheel cover rolled across my porch like a piece of colorful roadkill. You sold it? You actually sold it just so I couldn't have it? You're a monster, Megan. You're so selfish. Selfish? I laughed. And for the first time in 30 years, it wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated freedom. I worked 80-hour weeks for that car. I spent my 20s saving while you spent yours finding yourself on Dad's dime. I was the support beam for your failures for 3 decades, but I've decided to let the roof finally sit on the people who built it. Frank stepped forward, his finger stabbing the air toward my face. You had no right. We had a verbal agreement. We are a family, and family helps family. You've embarrassed me, and you've sabotaged your sister's future. There was no agreement, Frank. There was a verdict, I countered, stepping closer to him, refusing to blink. You decided my life was a subsidiary of yours. You drew up the blueprints from my assets without even consulting the person who paid for them. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted a safety net for the golden child you overcoddled until she became a professional victim. The neighbor's dog started barking, but Frank didn't notice. He was staring at me as if I were a stranger, and in a way I was. I was no longer the reliable, quiet Megan who nodded and smiled while they carved up my life. I was the architect now. You're going to pay for this, Madison sobbed, her face blotchy with rage. Dad, do something. She can't do this. She already did, Frank whispered, the realization finally hitting him. He looked at the empty driveway, then at the modest silver hatchback I'd parked around the corner, which he hadn't even noticed. He realized his power over me, the emotional hold he'd cultivated since I was a child, had been cut with a single signature on a dotted line. I started to close the door, but I stopped for one last look at the wreckage of their expectations. The dealership closes at 6 p.m., Frank. Maybe they have something in the used lot that actually fits the budget you haven't tried to steal from me. As the door clicked shut, the silence of my condo was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. But I knew this wasn't the end. They weren't just going to go away. They were going to try one last desperate move to drag me back into the vortex of their dysfunction. I heard Frank pounding on the door, but I was already walking toward my kitchen to pour a glass of wine, knowing the final Sunday dinner was only 24 hours away, and this time, I was bringing the bill. The final Sunday dinner was a hollow performance. I didn't go there to eat. I arrived only to collect the last of my belongings and close the chapter on this family betrayal. The atmosphere was suffocating. Margaret's eyes were red from crying, and Frank sat in a silence so heavy it felt like lead. They had spent decades building a throne for Madison, only to realize they were the ones who would have to carry it for the rest of their lives. "You've destroyed this family, Megan," Margaret whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and regretted expectations. She still couldn't see that she was the one who had handed Madison the matches. "No, Mom," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I just stopped being the foundation for your lies. I'm done being the backup plan. Welcome to Prime Karma Stories, your home for the most satisfying tales of revenge and justice." We dive deep into family drama and life lessons that prove karma always finds its way. This was the ultimate family karma. Without my luxury SUV to steal, or my hard-earned savings to drain, Madison was forced to move back into her childhood bedroom. The golden child was now a permanent, brooding guest in their once quiet retirement, turning their peace into a daily nightmare of demands and entitlement. They were finally reaping exactly what they had spent 30 years sowing. As I walked to my modest silver hatchback, I felt lighter than I ever had in my $50,000 Target. I was no longer the support beam holding up their dysfunction. I was the architect of my own freedom. I drove away, leaving their house in the rearview mirror. For the first time, the silence wasn't a burden. It was my hard-earned reward. If you believe in justice and love a good karma story, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Does karma always find its way in your family?